We'll kick off with this framework of medical device risk management. As you all know, in medical device risk management, we're talking about the safety risks. Nowhere in the ISO 14971 that we need to be compliant with in medical device world risk management does it talk about budget or schedule risks for projects. Everything is to do with safety of your medical devices that you are developing. Now, what you need to have in order to be compliant with 14971 are you have to have a risk management process, you have to have policies in place, you need to have trained your staff for risk management, and you need to have your reports in place. So you have to create a risk management plan prior to actually doing the risk management, and a report where you can see how this risk management process was done and if everything was done according to the plan. It is important to do it early on, so you shouldn't leave risk management to do it later after your development of the medical device, because ideally the outputs of risk management should become the inputs of your design and development of the device. And of course, it's also very, very hard to fix risks that have occurred during development once you are doing it after you have already developed. So it's always good to start early on. Right, so let's have a quick look into the risk management process and what does 14971 require from medical device developers. So the process is made into smaller steps, and you start always with risk analysis, which includes the description of the intended use of your product, the normal use of your product, as well as the foreseeable misuse of the product. And this foreseeable misuse of the product should include identifying the misuse conditions or situations that might occur, and what are the related hazard and hazardous situations to these conditions. During the risk analysis, then you should analyze the severity and probability of the hazards, but it is in the risk evaluation phase where you determine the levels for each of the risks that have been identified for the acceptability or unacceptability. So for all unacceptable risks, you need, of course, to put risk control measures in place to show how you can mitigate these risks. In other words, risk control determines then the actions that need to be taken in order to get the risk or lower the risk to an acceptable level. And risk control does not, or risk management process doesn't end there, because you also need to make sure that the risk mitigation or the risk control that you put in place actually works. So you need to verify that everything works and the risk control measures that you put in place actually do lower the risks as you want them to be lowered. And you need to, of course, make sure that you report everything. So you have to have your risk report to make to prove that all the identified risks that you have defined or described beforehand can be traced to decisions you have made, the risk control measures that have put in place, and the verification of those risk control measures. And of course, you need to collect all this information together with post-production information. So after your product has been placed on the market, you still collect information about the potential or the risks that have occurred. And all of that needs to be put into risk management file. And this is the kind of where you put your risk management plan that describes how to do risk management, or how you will do your medical device risk management, and the risk report to indicate that you have done everything according to the plan that you had in place. So very shortly, maybe into what is risk then, and how do you do risk management? So we are again talking, just to remind you, about the safety and effectiveness of a medical device. And the risk as such is a combination of the probability of occurrence of the harm and the severity of that harm. And you need to establish the safety and effectiveness of a medical device that contains software, and you need to know what the software is intended to do and demonstrate that the use of the software fulfills that intention without causing any unacceptable risks to the patient or the user of the medical device. And a lot of times the risk management is such that it uses different techniques. So you have brainstorms, you have checklists, but most often you use risk analysis and feedback from the similar products already put on market to be sure that you haven't forgotten anything at all. 14971 as a minimum requires you to do a hazard analysis. So you, of course, the higher class medical devices you have, the more you should do. And hazard analysis as such is a top-down risk management method, but there is also, if you have software as a medical device of higher risk class, then you should also do FMEA, and it's recommended by 14971 as well. And this is a kind of bottom-up look into risks. Hazard analysis is a way, or hazard identification is a way to figure out what can reasonably go wrong with your device and what hazardous situations and harm can result in it. So hazard as such is a potential source of harm. So there are hazards all around us, but if we use hazards in a controlled manner, they will not cause harm. But if we use them in an uncontrolled manner, which is also called sequence of events, that can lead to a hazard being realized, then we need to also figure out and identify these situations in which the hazards can be exposed and harm can be caused to patients. It is important to remember that when there is harm to patients, we need to, of course, understand the acceptable levels and unacceptable levels, and if it's an unacceptable level, then we need to mitigate and control that risk. Most of the time, we control risks by implementing protective measures into design, and therefore we can kind of lower the level of risk of the device. But mostly it is important to remember that you start with identifying the hazards, then you identify the hazardous situation that in which the harm can be, or the patients or users can be exposed to harm, and the actual harm, define that and see if the risks or hazards lead to unacceptable level in which you have to control them. Then you mitigate those risks and control the risks, and then you have to test if these mitigations actually do what you expect them to do, so getting the risk to acceptable level. So it's a step-by-step approach in which you identify, mitigate, verify risks. And of course, everything, do not forget, has to be documented in your risk management plan first, and then in the risk report. And then you still collect those risks once your product is on the market, to make sure that if there are new risks you haven't considered before, that you will have to describe them. And if some mitigations have changed, you need to revise or add to the risk mitigations.